My name is Chiara Valli. I'm a postdoc researcher at the Department of Observation at the University of Gothenburg. My plan was to travel and come to Trondheim and meet you all in person and present the findings of my research. But quite literally, life got in the way. I have a 3-month-old baby, and it would have been simply too difficult for me to travel at this moment. I therefore want to thank very much the session organizers and the conference organizers for being so understanding and allowing me to present by remote and helping me with the technologies to do that. The findings I will present today are part of a larger project on heritage and marginalization. The project is led by Feras Hamami at the Department of Conservation, University of Gothenburg, and is financed by the Swedish National Board of Heritage Conservation. I hope to meet you all in person one day soon. If we try to unpack how conceptions of property inform urban development and everyday urban practice, there is one particular model of urban governance that is extremely helpful to observe. This model is the Business Improvement District. BIDs consist of public-private partnerships in which private stakeholders and real estate owners, by engaging in special self-taxations, assume a pivotal role in management of urban spaces, aiming at improving the livability and real estate values of certain geographically defined areas. The BID model emerged from a long tradition of private sector-led initiatives for revitalizing city centers in Canadian and US cities. This model has also been adopted in several cities across Asia, Africa, and Europe, including Germany, the UK, and recently even in Denmark. BIDs represent outstanding study fields for exploring how ownership is negotiated by public and private actors in urban decision-making. What I would like to highlight today in my presentation is how BIDs are emerging in Sweden too, in what has been called the post-welfare hastily neoliberalizing city, where balances and boundaries between public and private interests are being redrawn politically, legally, and culturally, as this session is highlighting. In this presentation, I will start by recalling the main international academic critiques to the BID model. Following, I will present some of our findings about BID Gamlestaden, the first official BID agreement in Sweden, in relation to issues of social sustainability, power, participation, and property. Then, I will contextualize the emergence of BIDs in Sweden by suggesting which were the structural and political changes that enabled its adoption and its cultural acceptations. Finally, I will come back to the session conceptual framework and reflect about how all of this informs our understanding of the relationship between property, urban development, and decision making. International research depicts BID-like partnerships as controversial political tools. In fact, they are praised and adopted by more and more local governments and portrayed by some researchers as successful interventions in channeling private financial resources for public goods, advancing business and retail, and promoting residential development. Still, most researchers are rather critical of the model, raising concerns about, amongst other issues, inequitable representation of residents on the basis of wealth, inequality in public service provision, privatization and securitization of public spaces, promotion of gentrification and space-based disparities. Noticeably, Rankin and Delaney contend that BIDs can be read as an iconic institution of rollout neoliberalism, as they are an institutional mechanism through which urban economic development is devolved to neighborhood, while shifting the onus and scale for such competitive strategies to commercial property owners and tenants who pay levies and volunteer their time. Given this extensive international critique, It is quite urgent to observe and reflect about the state of bids in Sweden. In fact, there is no national legislation on bid. However, the bid model is now rapidly gaining popularity, and various versions of it are currently implemented in several cities and towns across the country. Would bids work in Sweden? This was the central question addressed at a conference held in Stockholm in 2009 amongst 80 municipal policymakers, authority representatives, and academics on the viability and applicability of the bid model in Swedish cities. After the conference, a lack of consensus remained over the applicability of a bid legislation in Sweden. Cook and Ward reported that a number of concerns were expressed by the participating stakeholders and that this type of quite profound change was understood to be politically unthinkable in Sweden. Namely, given Sweden's social democratic traditions, some were unsure whether the model, emerging as it has out of two of the most neoliberalizing urban policy contexts, UK and US, would be entirely appropriate. The bid model seemed to represent a socially and politically drastic departure from Sweden's social democratic traditions. In May 2018, the first official Swedish bid agreement was signed between the municipality of Gothenburg and the local property owners association in the Gamlestaden neighborhood. 10 years later then, there is still no Swedish national legislation on bid, yet there is a de facto official bid partnership, stipulated at the municipal level, that is consistently being promoted as a model to be transferred and applied to other municipalities across the country. Given the concerns expressed less than 10 years ago on the Swedish context, on top of international critiques, we decided to analyze in depth the case of Bid Gamlestan and to test if those concerns were completely misplaced. In 2018, we conducted 20 in-depth interviews on the Gamlestaden study case with planners, city officials, real estate developers, archaeologists, local politicians, social workers, and residents. Secondary data from planning documents, local history literature, archival print media coverage, and social media posts were also analyzed. Today, I would like to focus on the issue of social sustainability, access, and exclusion from decision-making in relation to property and ownership. The neighborhood of Gamlestaden is located in the northeast of Gothenburg. It counts about 9,000 inhabitants and has since the 19th century been characterized as a working-class neighborhood, the first city factories being founded there. Until the 1950s, the industries had a prominent role in the urban development of Gamlestaden as the primary housing and services providers together with the municipality. Following the economic recession of the 1970s and the relocation of large part of the industrial production, many rental apartments originally built for factory workers were left vacant. During the 1980s and throughout the 1990s, the municipality allocated a high number of social housing dwellings in the area and accommodated many newly arrived refugees. With percentages that reached 30% and in some buildings up to 100% of dwellings allocated to vulnerable groups and newly landed refugees, Gamlestaden became in those years one of the city areas with the highest concentration of unemployment, social benefits recipients, and first-generation immigrants. The post-industrial recession, the high vacancy level, and the high unemployment rate left space for the infiltration and spread of illegal or even criminal activities. Civic disturbance, drug dealing, and petty crime became quite common in public spaces and in some buildings. These socioeconomic challenges are at the basis of a harsh stigmatization process towards the area. Since the early 2000s, the city and the region have worked together on capitalizing on the central location of Gamlestan and envisioned the area as a new strategic transport hub with new housing, commerce, and services. The city planning department developed a detailed master plan for Gamlestaden as a strategic densification node that foresees the construction of a new travel center, a World Literature Center, a shopping precinct, a hotel, and 3,000 new flats that will double the number of residents in the area in just a few years. In the same years, the beginning of the 2000s, the largest municipal housing company in the area, Poseidon, initiated a partnership of 42 local property owners and a consultancy firm. The association, called Real Estate Owners in Gamlestaden, was a non-profit organization whose members had the common vision of making Gamlestaden more safe, secure, and attractive, and improving its reputation. Explicit goals were to reduce the amount of apartments for social benefits recipients and diminishing crime in apartment buildings and public spaces. The public administration was not an official partner in the association, but was regularly informed of its activities. The vision shows a market-oriented logic, where a milieu that facilitates business is necessary prerequisite for sustainable local development. Sustainability requires business friendliness, we read in a report of the association. Municipal and private estate owners and owners' cooperatives should act together to fulfill the premises of business principles. The vision is to achieve a living environment where people thrive and want to live in, which would mean higher customer satisfaction and attractiveness. The management of private cooperative housing and the provision of public rental housing need to respond to business principles, and in particular to the goal of increasing property values. 2018 represents an important milestone in the history of the association and a turning point in the broader prospects of bid practices in Sweden. Gamlestaden Property Owners Association was officially formalized as the first bid agreement in the country. The association signed an official collaboration agreement with the municipality of Gothenburg and 8 partners. The agreement aims to provide institutional structure support and continuity public investment into the bid-inspired initiative that has de facto been in place for almost 20 years. Inspired by Kudla and Corey's depiction of bids as actors in service of a middle position, I will now illustrate the political relations of bid Gamlestaden with governance from above, local authorities, planners and politicians, and the relation with actors below, local residents and businesses. In the broader context of this session conceptual framework, we could say that estate ownership, organized in a bid, shapes access to channels above and exercise power over actors below. By means of being organized and by using political capital of its most powerful members, the partnership of property owners succeeded in catalyzing public funding opportunities into Gamlestaden, for instance for improving urban decor and green, lighting parking lots. Most importantly, drawing on its institutional and political connections, the association was able to work relatively closely with the region and the city planning department, crucial for the drastic changes the neighborhood and its surroundings will undergo in the coming years. Urban planning processes in Sweden have a rather strong top-down characterization, led by the City Planning Office in collaboration with large institutional and private stakeholders. Our interviews with residents confirmed that in the redevelopment plans of Gamlestaden, they were involved primarily at the receiving end of communications. Still, from official planning documents, it emerged that City Planning Office held special meetings with the Owners Association as local consultants in the process of preparing the General Master Plan in 2002-2006. Moreover, the real estate company Platzer hosts a showroom about the redevelopment plans in one of its buildings, which at times serves as a venue for bid meetings. The bid partnerships hence works as a venue and a tool for facilitating flows of information between planners, developers, and small property owners, and helps creating consensus around the aligned agendas of city planning and developers. Critically, this privileged platform of communication between the planning department and local actors excludes those who are not part of the bid, and namely all the residents who do not own property, raising important concerns about how bids can skew democratic dialogue on urban matters and planning processes. Regarding the bid relationships below with residents and businesses, some critical aspects emerged. We already mentioned that strategies of sanitation and imagineering were put in place by working on the urban decor design and lighting. The association also co-financed gating access to the internal courtyards of some residential buildings, which had historically been open, to prevent the access of substance users and other disturbing behaviors to the common gardens. Particularly telling is the case of the Bellevue Industrial District, a central area in Gamlestan dominated by small-scale businesses such as car repairs, tire shops, warehouses, thrift store, mosques, ethnic food shops, cultural associations, and so on. Although economically vital, Bellevue aesthetics are more informal than other areas nearby. With the idea that the Bellevue area lowers the value of the adjacent estates, the Property Owners Association has been putting pressure on the city in various ways to take action in the area, including filing reports on littering to the city environment and health authorities, and denouncing shady activities like stolen goods and alcohol reselling to the police and to the media. By consistently labeling the area as chaotic, problematic, and even lawless, the bid leadership did not only enforce discipline in power, but also legitimizes its specific actions and its very presence. The bid leader stated in our interview, "The municipality did not understand that this is a collective action problem. It's many actors in the same place, and we don't have the legal means to deal with that. That's why you need bids, really." While in international cases, the regulation and disciplining actions of bids typically focus on public and commercial spaces, a crucial aspect here is the disciplining actions in housing. As the leading partner in the Gamlestaden Association is a municipal housing company, Poseidon, most disciplining actions take place here through housing provision and affect specifically the housing situation of the most vulnerable social groups. As mentioned before, a priority goal of the Property Association is to reduce the presence of residents on social benefits from the housing stock altogether. The association explicitly states that there are clashing interests between the Property Owners Association and local authorities, consisting of, on the one hand, the desire to offer the best possible living environment for all tenants, and on the other hand, the necessity for social services to offer accommodations for vulnerable categories. Such statements from the association reports imply that the presence of social benefit recipients in rental housing potentially constitutes a disturbance for other tenants and is directly connected to the economic devaluation of the estate. Deeming what they perceived as disproportionate levels of social benefit recipients and their alleged misbehavior being amongst the primary causes of urban blight and decline in Gamlestan, the association deployed a set of measures to displace them. In particular, the municipal housing company Poseidon actively worked for and managed to reduce the concentration of social housing by first intervening punctually and systematically against disturbances and missed rent payments, and second, relocating and redistributing social services accommodations to other parts of the city. Statistical data show clear changes in the socio-economic fabric of Gamlestaden between the mid-90s and 2010. The average income increased, while the proportion of residents with foreign background decreased. The local real estate values increased considerably more than the city average over this period. And the most striking change, however, is in the share of social benefits recipients, which went from 20% of the total population in 1996 to 7% in 2010. We said earlier that the 2009 Stockholm Conference on Bids led most participants to conclude that bid was not an appropriate tool for the Swedish context, and an almost unthinkable departure from Swedish social democratic legacy. What are the political and structural changes that enable the bid model to become appropriate, at least at the municipal level, over the course of less than 10 years? I propose that three parallel structural and discursive processes have created favorable conditions that facilitated the acceptation of bids. First, in the past 2 decades, Swedish cities have become increasingly polarized and segregated, with planning interventions mainly aiming to making spaces for the upper middle classes rather than lifting the conditions of lower income immigrant dense areas. Despite the diverse national interventions since the 1970s, including area-based policies for distressed neighborhoods, none of these policies have managed to affect level of socioeconomic and ethnic segregation more than marginally. The increased polarization, the worsening condition of the already worst-off neighborhoods, and the substantial failure of national policies to counteract segregation led municipal actors to look for alternative, non-orthodox local solutions. The second process, connected to the former, is an increased deceptive politicization of urban segregated areas based on stigmatization, which endorses a sense of emergency that calls for extreme measures. In the recent 2018 electoral campaign, for instance, the urban dimension of segregation and their effects were consistently referenced as a pretext to endorse anti-immigration sentiments. More than ever, distressed urban areas are exploited as an ideological battleground, playing on issues of fear and security. This creates a sense of urgency and emergency in the search for new tools of urban governance. The third fundamental process is the decentralization of housing responsibilities to the local scale. Municipal actors with shrinking resources are now trying to address the consequences of overall structural challenges and at the same time trying to compete on market terms. It is not surprising then that state-market relations get redrawn to the benefit of private stakeholders and property owners through new political tools. In conclusion, how does this inform our understanding of the relationship between property, urban development, and decision-making? On the basis of ownership, bids push economic interests and political agendas of those who are part of it: developers, large real estate owners, business owners, individual homeowners. We have seen how bids are resourceful networks that acquire power to access upper levels of decision-making, influence and discipline other residents and local businesses. Yet it is important to highlight that different association members hold diverse social and economic capitals, since they span from international developers to individual middle-class homeowners. This has important implications. First, the access to structures of urban governance above is not univocal. That means it is not simply a channel for empowerment. It is also a channel through which consensus about top-down decision-making and planning is built amongst local homeowners. Second, although the gains differ drastically amongst bid members, the goals and actions are depicted in the form of an hegemonic common good, which promotes homogeneous representations and hinders possibilities for alternative visions. Furthermore, in terms of democracy and decision-making in urban matters, property-based organizations like BIDS can promote local agendas and catalyze investments for local improvements. Yet, they also reinforce top-down processes, perpetrate and back the interests of the home-owning middle classes and of large real estate companies, further exclude and marginalize tenants and especially the most economically weak ones from decision-making, and in the case at hand, it facilitates their very displacement. Finally, I would like to say that in the face of a growing consensus and the enthusiasm around beats in Sweden, it is crucial to implement more critical research on their effects and their underlying principles, which would warn from the threats that property legitimization poses to democracy. Thank you very much for your attention. Please use the address on this slide to contact me for any feedback or questions. And I hope to meet you all in person sometime soon.